evening. Thank you for joining us as we find ourselves in the grips of COVID-19. Tonight, we examine the Filipino healthcare workers who have emerged as heroes on the front lines of the crisis, putting themselves in harm's way to help others. Here's Nightline co-anchor Juju Chang with our Turning Point series.
Like there are several generations that live together. She actually did come down with COVID.
8 months into the pandemic, California is the second state to hit 1 million COVID cases. Pockets of LA once again in crisis mode. For Aquilina Soriano Versosa, the stakes have never been higher.
We had one couple where it's 16 people living in a house. One couple came down positive. So then it started to expose the whole house.
She heads up the Filipino Workers Center, and right now, she says she's not just delivering food, she's saving lives.
This pandemic has really shone a light on the inequities that exist in our community.
Thank you so much.
Even before the pandemic, a lot of our community was already in crisis, dealing with poverty, dealing with crowded housing conditions, and bad working conditions.
In the heart of LA, in what's known as Filipino Town, this group is a lifeline to the community here as COVID-19 cases continue to climb. In California, 1 in every 5 nurses is of Filipino descent. Nationally, 4% of registered nurses are Filipino American, but account for nearly 1/3 of the COVID deaths, the largest non-white ethnic group amongst nurses to die of COVID-19. When a wave of COVID hit Florida this summer, 32-year-old nurse Rhea Mora found herself fighting in the thick of the battle.
Why do you think so many of your fellow nurses in the hospital are Filipinos?
I think because it's part of our culture. We love caring.
It wasn't long before the mother of 2 was diagnosed with COVID-19. 4 days later, her husband Joe also tested positive. Rhea recovered, but Joe took a turn for the worse, placed on a ventilator.
Rhea, what was it like being in the hospital, knowing your husband was somewhere as a patient and hearing the code blues go off?
A lot of my patients, most of them went to ICU and then later on died. So I was really scared.
And Joe, I know this in many ways was the battle of your life. What memories do you have of that battle?
I didn't want to sleep. I was scared that if I closed my eyes that I wouldn't have the strength that I needed to continue breathing.
After a grueling, nearly month-long battle with the virus, Joe was finally able to return home.
What was that first kiss like for you when you got reunited?
It was the best reunion.
My first kiss after 24 days.
I realized how important my family is and how much should I spend time with my family.
I understand that a lot of your nurses were also Filipinos.
Yes, that's true. Really, during that time, I relied on the machines that kept my organs going and the nurses that kept giving me care throughout the day and night.
It's not a coincidence there are so many Filipino Americans in nursing. It's a legacy that can be traced back through American history. The Philippines was one of the very few countries the U.S. ever colonized.
Famed George Dewey, hero of Manila Bay, whose victory over the Spanish fleet in 1898 won the Philippine Islands for the United States.
One of the things that the United States wanted to do was to sort of create a cheap, Anglophone, accessible, and mobile labor force in their new colony, to train them in specific vocations that were not necessarily useful to Filipinos in the Philippines, but were useful to Americans, and specifically the U.S. military.
Professor Adrian De Leon, who studies Filipino-American history at USC, says America tapped into this cheap labor pipeline in the 60s when the U.S. suffered a nursing shortage. Filipino nurses were recruited and brought to the mainland. Over 150,000 Filipino nurses have since migrated to the U.S.
There's a thing in Tagalog called utang na loob, which means debt from within. It translates into debt coming from a good conscience, which is the sort of debt that you want to have to sort of repay your family or someone who had cared for you to make sure that they're cared back in turn.
And now, Filipino American healthcare workers are disproportionately caught in the crosshairs of a raging pandemic, praised as heroes, but thrust onto the front lines of a deadly battle. Among them, Erwin Lambrento. He was a doctor in the Philippines. But after falling in love with Aurora, his college sweetheart, a respiratory therapist herself, he immigrated to the U.S. following her and his love of medicine.
Dad was very hardworking. He came here and worked his way up to have like a good life with us here.
What do you think made him a good husband and a good father?
I mean, I couldn't ask for more. Whatever you needed, I mean, he would try to give it to you. Kind of like, I don't have to beg him to get me this or get me that or do this or do that.
Fair to say he was the love of your life.
Of course, yeah.
His other love? Nursing. He truly loved being an ER nurse for more than 20 years. But Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, his hospital, overnight became known as the epicenter of the epicenter.
He was still going to work. We were telling him, like, why don't you take a break or take a vacation or something? And he said, no, are you kidding me? I have a lot of coworkers who are quarantined right now and they had COVID, so he really had to go.
He felt a sense of duty.
Yeah, no, I can't do that. That's what he says.
Edward Bonilla is an EMT, a first responder who says Erwin was the one everyone looked up to in the ER. But he was also the life of the party.
He actually was on the beach, the DJ of Elmhurst. He always logged into his music accounts and he would always play music. That was his thing. No one would touch that.
You two were like the Batman and Robin of the ER.
Correct. He will be the first person that patient sees besides me.
When you saw him heading towards your patient, what went through your mind?
What better person for this patient to receive care from? He's always going to treat the patient the same way he treats everyone, with compassion.
Like so many Filipino Americans, Erwin's home was intergenerational, living with his grown kids and their grandparents.
COVID came and he realized that there were a lot of COVID patients already, so he decided right there and then to bring his parents to New Jersey where his sister lives.
He saved their lives.
I would say that, yeah. Yeah, then that's how his mother is really, really, very, very, she couldn't take it because that was the last time they spoke to him. That was it.
At the end of March, as cases peaked in New York, Erwin came down with a fever. His family had to beg him to go to the hospital.
So you took care of him?
Yeah, just bring him food. He said, I think my oxygen level is very low, which was 90. And I said, that's not normal. I told him, can you go to your hospital now? I said, no, I'm okay, I'm okay.
Within a month, he was gone.
I say, like, why? It's like, why did you leave me? Something like that. Like, I wasn't really prepared for this because to be honest, I depended on him on almost everything.
How big a hole has this left in your world?
Oh my God, what a hole! It's a big hole. I don't know. Like, I'm still picking up the pieces.
His colleagues, those frontline workers, paying their respects with lights and sirens.
Then they were all in front of the hospital. It's like they said it's like a 21 gun force. So, yeah. So and I saw it on the news in the Philippines.
Three long months after his death, his wife Aurora and daughter Kara are finally putting Erwin's ashes to rest.
He can finally rest in peace. I was saying, like, okay, we can finally put you in your resting place forever.
Erwin's legacy, first and foremost, a loving family man, a dedicated caregiver. But his family hopes that his death, like so many Filipino American healthcare workers, will not go unnoticed.
I wish people would see that all of these like numbers, that these statistics, there are human lives to them. They are like someone's father, someone's mother, his sister, someone's significant other. But I don't want people to forget the humanity behind those statistics.